For this week's episode, we are going to talk about the rape of Yuyun, and consequently, since this is a graphic topic, if you are uncomfortable about the topic of sexual violence and rape, this might not be the episode for you, so this is just a trigger warning. Welcome to the 6th episode of Dialogika. I'm Stephanie, and Sweden's away this week and this month doing his actual hustles, which is working for our political campaign, and he's enjoying hot dogs and fries and burgers in New York right now. And so this week we have a special guest speaker, Priscilla.
Hi, I'm Priscilla. I'm studied feminist anthropology in Oxford University under Professor Mary Yashok, super famous woman, and a longtime friend of Stephanie's.
This week we're going to talk about the Yuyun case, and we want to talk about rape, domestic violence. We also talk about why we think this story really blew up on social media and resonated with Indonesians, the motivations for rape, and how we think we should use this topic to educate men and boys not to rape and take control and agency over their choices in everyday life. But yeah, here's to it. We want to do a quick rundown of the events that happened leading to Yuyun's death.
On April 2nd, young girl Yuyun was walking home from school. She just came back from her Girl Scout activities when she was stopped by 14 young men, one of which was her ex-boyfriend.
Most of which were boys she knew from school. And so they raped her to the point of exhaustion, taking turns even after she passed away. And they threw away her body in a ditch and covered it up with leaves and left her to rot. So her family tried to find her and couldn't find her, and eventually they organized a local search and rescue and found her dead body, from which 4 days later the police came and arrested 4 boys initially and then another 4 boys after that. So of the 14 men who raped Yuyun, 12 of them are in custody and 2 of them are actually still on the loose. Initially the news didn't gain that much traction. The events were reported on local media, but it didn't go national until 1 month after that, when activists who noticed that this happened started to use this hashtag Nyala Untuk Yuyun to bring greater visibility to this incident.
Yeah. By May 2nd, BBC published a huge report on it, during which the case got a lot more exposure. Within a month, Nyala Untuk Yuyun already gained 13,000 posts in the media.
And women activists and other women in general saw this lack of attention as a general disregard for women's issues and the safety of women in Indonesia, and found that this crime was a very good rallying point to talk about sexual violence in Indonesia in general as well, and the idea that we need to improve the laws in sexual violence and how to handle these kinds of cases in the future. This got so much traction that the government is now revising a draft for the laws against the violence against women.
This, I think, is just a very notable case because as an Indonesian, I never hear cases of gang rape escalated to this scale. Mm-hmm. And I'm really glad to hear that it's getting the right traction from the government and that stronger sanctions are being discussed.
Yeah, but so the thing that was, I think, really galvanized a lot of activists was the fact that no one in government really took notice until the netizen and social media outrage became too big. Johanna Yembise, the Minister of Women Empowerment, actually said, and I'm quoting from Antara News here, "Indonesia is mourning. This case has shocked the state. I think such a case has happened for the first time in Indonesia." She didn't actually know this happened until news of the sexual crime on the BBC and all of these other media came. And then her son, who was studying in Britain, told her about this. So, yes. Good job, Minister.
Actually, this is not the first time.
That was me being sarcastic, if you guys don't know my sense of sarcasm. But yeah, this is not the first time.
This is absolutely not the first time gang rape happened in Indonesia.
So what ended up happening is, following the government's reaction, Jokowi actually said that he wanted the harshest possible sentence for these perpetrators and these rapists. And of the 12 that are in custody, 7 of them have been sentenced already. So the 7 that has been sentenced are the perpetrators who were under the age of 18, and they got a sentence of 10 years in prison. Only 10 years in prison. So these boys who raped Yuyun, who are 14, 15, will be 25 when they are out, and I don't think there's going to be any form of rehabilitative or preventative thing that could happen. It makes me severely uncomfortable. And we don't have sex offender registry, right? So how do you know if your neighbor or the person you're employing wasn't a former rapist? That kind of creeps me out a lot. That should creep everybody out.
Yeah. I'm Indonesian. I followed the news quite religiously, and we've heard cases enlarged in other countries, but I think this is the first time in Indonesia. Why do you think that's the case? Why is it? Is it now? Is it social media?
I think it's a confluence of factors for sure, right? But I think in this case, one, this is the right case, right? The idea that this is a victim that is relatively young. She also fits the model of the blameless victim, and this is disproportionately contrasted to the fact that there's like 14 young men who raped her, right, and killed her, right? So that gross disproportion of the violent act really propelled it into the spotlight. So if I think there was only 2 guys and her, it wouldn't have this much attention. But I think it's also the fact that there's a clear protagonist here who we're rooting for, right? Yuyun, like, she's a relatable person, right? Like, we're all 14 once, and everyone has a sister or a daughter or someone they can consider and put their identity into her,
And she's just doing something that's so
innocuous,
commonplace,
right? Yeah.
for everyone. She goes home to school.
Yeah.
Now, when I first read the news, I felt speechless and appalled, and as a woman in this country, feel even less safe.
Yeah.
You're just going about your daily life, and suddenly you are attacked by 14 men.
The idea that violence against women is something that is not commonplace, or is that something that is rare and once in a blue moon thing, is very not true for most girls, right? Like, all girls, all women, this was a hashtag for a while, right? And like, hashtag yes, all women. So like, the idea that all women at some point of their lives have feared for their own personal safety is not surprising to us, right? I don't know if you have experience in this, but like...
Oh no, I'm completely paranoid about everything about rape. That's just me, and
I don't think it's just you. I think that's all women, Like, we've all been in situations where it's been uncomfortable for some reason.
You walk home, and when you're alone, you walk faster. You clutch your bag.
You hold your keys.
You have a pepper spray, and you have, when it's just you and a driver and another passenger in a bus, you would imagine scenarios where you get kidnapped just because that's what you read in the news. And it could happen to you. And for women, that's definitely the thought that goes through our mind. It could happen to me anytime, anywhere.
The most dangerous thing is actually not stranger danger, right? Like, the idea that you're going to be raped or attacked by someone you don't know. Most of the time, like Yuyun's case, it's somebody who you know. How one of these perpetrators was actually an ex-boyfriend of Yuyun, right? So I think that definitely has a factor. And even if he wasn't in that group, like, the fact that, there's an acquaintance who raped her, and the chronology was also that she refused to, like, hang out with these guys. So these guys were like, oh, come, like, they were catcalling her, and then she refused to, like, hang out with them. She just wanted to go home. And so they decided to commit the worst thing possible. That idea of just, like, men feeling entitled to women's attention and feeling entitled to women's bodies is, like, very problematic, but also true in a way, in, like, both small and big scale, right? Because this is, like, I think a lot of women often feel that, if a guy is nice to them, they have to be nice back and give them the time of day, right? And, like, guys always have this, oh, I'm a nice guy, why doesn't she, like, pay attention to me,
There's a United Nations study on men and violence. They studied 3 sites in Indonesia. They studied Jakarta, rural Java, and Jayapura, places where incidents of rape are really high. Now, they surveyed the perpetrators of rape and tried to understand what were their motivations when they were raping a person. Now, 77% of the men cited that they have sexual entitlement to women's body, which is scary.
You can see me being nauseous and wanting to puke right now.
Well, even more nauseating, 55% of them say that they're entertainment seeking. So it's like, oh,
women as a form of entertainment. Oh god.
There's nothing good on Netflix, so I'm just gonna find a woman to rape. And then 30% of them rape a woman because of anger, or they want to punish the woman.
So basically, I had an employee before who actually we found out beat his wife, and we tried to get her to report to the police, and she just wouldn't. This idea that she doesn't want to upset the family, she doesn't want to change the family dynamics, and the idea that she brought it on or she blames herself, that's still very much entrenched in women's lives, right? Like this idea that they brought it upon themselves or they're gonna blame themselves. And even if they do report it, I think one thing that we would worry about is how the police would handle the problem, right? Because I think a lot of police may not take it as seriously. They see this as a domestic matter which should be solved within the family, and not necessarily something that should be criminally taken up on.
It makes it very difficult to even have a conversation about rape, about sexual violence, and about physical abuse at home when you live in a religious country where that is highly patriarchal. And they say, oh, well, man is the leader of the family.
Yeah.
Some people, I've heard, they believe they even have the right to beat their wives when their wives are deemed to be disobedient.
Yeah. We as a country don't really have a dialogue about what is healthy relationships and sex, right?
Actually, I have an acquaintance who endured domestic violence for 18 years of her marriage. She came out to her religious leader, a Christian religious leader, the pastor, and saying that I want to get a divorce. And so the pastor, instead of reporting it to the authorities or taking more being more supportive,
being a decent human being,
he actually along with the woman's family interpreted that divorce is wrong according to the Bible, and that the woman should just stay in the marriage. Well, that woman continued to be abused for another 10 years before she realized, you know what?
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough, and I'm just gonna go on a divorce. Which is very sad, because then you have some interpretations of religion justifying violence.
Yeah, and modesty or covering yourself up in different religions have been, blamed or been the prerogative of women to do, right? The idea is that you shouldn't entice men to rape you and cover yourself as the imperative for you to do. So this idea that you're culpable for the violence that happens to you is, I think, set up by religions who put the blame and who put the duty of women to guard their modesty, right? Instead of teaching men not to rape.
It goes back to the whole question of rape being an issue of power, actually, and not an issue about sex.
Yeah.
And the whole Yuyun case is a perfect example of that, when it's highly likely that the men felt rejected in one way or another, and felt that in order to gain their respect or their masculinity back, that they had to rape the girl.
Yeah. So there's several theories of rape. So this idea that, one, there's a sociobiological theory of rape. So this idea that rape is in the nature of men to do. They point out to the fact that animals rape other animals, so dolphins, orangutans, and other animals force sex. The dominant male forces sex on a female, and this somehow proves that rape is inevitable, which is one false, right? Even if it's true in nature, it doesn't have to be the case that it's inevitable. Men have an ability to control themselves, right? So I think this is definitely one of the weaker theories there are. So the control theory is rape as power, right? For men, how can they feel slighted or somehow feel like they need to assert their dominance? They use rape as one mechanism they can do that. And then the other one is rape as a gender-based hate crime. So the idea that rape is a particular kind of violence against women, in which, as obviously there are women who rape men, which is a whole another valid topic in itself, but generally rape is something that by and large is done by men towards women. And this is not to dismiss any kind of other rape, but man on female rape is definitely one of the bigger categories in which this happens. And in particular, gang rape itself has its own particular dynamics and its own particular problems, which has to do with like hypermasculinity and the idea that men need to prove themselves.
Yeah, I think the dynamics of gang rape definitely tap into the whole male competition. And in a group of men, power is actually also defined by the society. Mm-hmm. And in that case, in a particular group. So, for example, in a very famous novel called Lord of Flies, the story is just a bunch of little boys. They were abandoned an island, and then one became the leader. And, you know, at the onstart of the novel, one of the younger boys, he just took a conch that's like a shell. Yeah. And then he said, whoever has the conch has the power. Yeah. And so immediately that conch becomes an object of power through which other men or members of the group could earn their right to power, even though it's just a trivial object. Yeah. Now, when there is a gang rape, perhaps even members of the group could have felt hesitant about it, but because they didn't want to lose their place of power in the group, they had to also participate in the gang rape in order to maintain their status in the group.
Yeah, and this is actually a part of a larger, it's called criminal spin theory. So in criminology, the idea that, for example, the boys in this Yuyun case didn't initially set out to rape Yuyun, but because they're in a group dynamic and the group setting, slowly things escalate, and there's a cycle in which it rapidly and acutely, this like male ego dominance, hypermasculinity things, you kind of want to one up each other, and then that makes you unable to say no and stop the cycle. And so like it's kind of like bandwagoning into something that's just so heinous and so obscene and ununderstandable to us, right? Like, how can this happen, right? So a lot of people, one reaction to you in this thing is like, oh, they were drinking alcohol. This is alcohol's fault. No, it is not. People have drunk alcohol so much, and most of the time they don't end up raping women. Like the problem I have with like blaming pornography and alcohol is you're taking away the agency of men to rape. You're saying that it's pornography and alcohol that causes men to rape, and you kind of say that, okay, they're not as much responsible for what they've done.
I mean, they certainly do have agency, and I agree with you. We don't want to take away their agency and make them unaccountable for their actions, but certainly you would agree that the increase of pornography, increasing access to internet has allowed men to be more stimulated by the media.
I think it just more normalizes the idea of violence in sex. You know, I think, for example, in this case they had porn which was more like gang rapey type stuff, so it kind of gives them the idea of violent sex being gratifying. So I think in that sense it gives them the idea of it. But I think also we as a country have had a problematic history with gang rape as well. Like, it's not the first time it happened, certainly not the last. I think some men just like the idea of having power. I think there's something to say with, you know, the fact that these young men are men in rural areas with not that many opportunities for work. I think they said they were unemployed, you know, they don't have a lot of prospects for a bright future. All of this idea that, I think with the idea of masculinity, right, you feel entitled to women's bodies, but not only that, you feel that by being violent and by getting what you want, you're being a real man. And if you're not a man who has a lot of power and agency over your life in general, so this is one easy, free way they can have some control over their life, right?
Absolutely.
And by getting that from a woman at somebody's expense.
Yeah. In a world where there's only limited ways for you to exert your masculinity, of course, attaining masculinity through rape and violence is one very sad way to do it.
I want us to have a dialogue in terms of, if you were a part of this group of men, right? Because I'm sure this group of men are not particularly exceptionally evil as individual, right? Like, how can most men in this circumstance, if they were put in this situation, will they have done the same thing or not? Can we like start a discussion? Like mothers to their sons, like teachers to their students. Like, if you're ever in a group situation like this, like, can you apply that to yourself and say, like, I'm gonna stop and stand up for women? Or like, because this applies to more everyday situations. If you see a woman being catcalled, or you see a woman being uncomfortably harassed by someone else, are you gonna step in and do something about it? And I think that should also be a part of this larger conversation.
Yeah.
And this is this week's episode of Dialogika. Thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dialogika. Special thanks to Sweden, who purely virtually edited this podcast. And as always, music credits goes to Ryan Little, Jazzard, and Brooke Free. More information about this topic and this case on our website, dialogika.id. And if you haven't yet, please like us on Facebook and Instagram. Tune in to our next episode in 2 weeks.